Hello, everyone. This is Mary Kurek with Frontrunners Innovate, and I have a wonderful guest for you today. His name is Nathan Ohle, and Nathan is the CEO of the International Economic Development Council. For all of you who are business owners that you hear this today, get excited because you're going to learn a little bit more about what it takes to kind of move yourself forward in as we were just saying, the economic development puzzle of the world there. I work with lots of innovators out there who are looking for those pathways to how to fit into that puzzle, so to speak. So Nathan's going to talk to us about his background, but first, let's look at the two people that are smiling at you now on camera. And I'm going to start with the one smiling the biggest, and that is Tsegga Medhin. And Tsegga is a familiar face. We've had her co-hosting before. She is the founder and CEO of the Pearl Leadership Institute out of the Raleigh-Durham area in North Carolina. And Tsegga, I'm going to let you introduce yourself first more properly, and then I'll go to Dr.TonyBello, and then we'll head on over to our interviewee. Okay?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Wonderful to hear from all of you, and delighted to be in your presence. And obviously, I call all of you change makers. Mary has been one of the top change makers that I've met over the years now, and it seems like it's a place for me to be with, and honored to be in your presence, actually. Dr. Bello, as well as Nathan. So I am Tsegga Medhin, and as Mary indicated, being in the place, I call myself an equity accelerator because that's what I think it probably be a much more defining way of encapsulating in those two words, which is obviously one of the major component of where we are and where we need to head on. And especially with you, Nathan, and reading more about your information, it makes me really feel good to talk about the sustainability of equity, and obviously continue to make our nation the best to be, and obviously the global impact that we have both with Mary and Dr. Bello in Nigeria. And so having been much more of my interest for the last 10 years, obviously, since 2015, when I was invited to speak on behalf of women and girls in STEM at the UN before their general meeting. In September. I think my invitation was for May, and we were the stakeholders that we spoke about more about what it's like to be moving on from the millennial goals to the sustainable goal 2030. And that has been, I would say, an engaging conversation. I also believe it's a roadmap for economic development, especially in the area that you are in, including obviously the place where you are in terms of agriculture. So there's a lot for us to be connected through this. And my interest has always been women and girls in STEM science, because I find that it's where the technology and innovation is, and arts, obviously, it's where the innovation and practically where every company, and the ones that I've worked with, obviously IBM and briefly for Credit Suisse and the banking and the industry, it seems like that's where we need to head on, but more so sustainably, so we become leaders, intentional leaders that we need to keep on moving and helping our nations to become better at what we do. Thank you. Looking forward to listen and learn and have a great conversation. Thank you again, Mary.
Thank you, Tsegga. Dr.TonyBello, Shine Bridge organization that I have known him with for probably, I don't know, maybe about 3 years. Yeah, this is all about transforming African staples into consumable packaged products that can be exported out into the United States and other places. But he has so many hats that he wears that I'm just going to let him share a little bit more about himself now before we get to Nathan. So.
Thank you, Mary. Again, my name is Dr. TonyBello, founder and chairman of Shine Bridge Global. We are based in the great state of Virginia, and doing work really about human capital development, empowering smallholder farmers in Nigeria, particularly. I am from Nigeria, and Africa at large. And we're leveraging our understanding of food science and technology to transform African staples into value-added consumer packaged foods. While we're doing that, there is a need to create markets, a need to leverage the United States interests in African countries to promote trade and investments. And we're basically bringing in the right talent pools from across the world to get deals done in Africa. Our particular focus for now is the cassava root crop. With the gluten-free consumer market continuing to grow, how do we replace hydrocolloids, gums? You take a package of a snack bar or a tortilla wrap, and they say it's gluten-free, but it has gums in it. How do we replace that with our starchy vegetables, cassava root crop? Some call it yuca, some call it manioc, but Nigeria is the #1 producer of cassava in the world. And how do we transform this into an economic crop? That's really what we are all about, and pulling on the diaspora talent and networks such as the Frontrunners Development Network, getting to meet folks like you guys here and learning from each other. So really, it's an opportunity. Thanks, Mary, for all that you're doing in Africa, in Nigeria. I think we met through Dr. Sita Nyameka, who sits on the board of Shinebridge Global. Good to meet both of you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now we come to the gentleman of the hour, so to speak, our interviewee, Nathan Ohle. So Nathan, tell us a little bit about your background. And I know that we talked about it being more into the rural communities, and that maybe further back than that brought you into the work that you're doing now with economic developers. But share a little bit about where you come from.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be with you. It's great to be with the three of you, and certainly appreciate the opportunity. As Mary said, I'm Nathan Ohle, and the President and CEO of the International Economic Development Council. IDC is the world's largest association for economic developers, which means we're working with economic developers and economic development organizations across the world to do a whole set of things. We do professional development with individuals and with organizations. So we have opportunities for individuals to both accelerate their own career through a number of courses, but also 2 certification programs. One called the Certified Economic Developer, which is tried and true kind of gold standard in economic development. And one that's newer is called the Entrepreneur Development Professional, EDP, which is focused on entrepreneurship-led economic development, which is obviously an emerging trend in economic development, but an opportunity for us to really dig in on what does a focus on entrepreneurship and small business growth mean to communities of all sizes, and how do we help accelerate those efforts. We host 3 conferences a year centered around both the content for people to learn, but also networking opportunities and bringing economic developers together. We do research and advocacy, particularly here in the United States at the federal level on the advocacy side. And then we try and build partnerships. We want to build partnerships with organizations across the world to accelerate economic development efforts, to move the field of economic development forward, and to really identify, that next generation of leaders. And how do we help build and support those leaders to make sure that economic developers and economic development itself is at the forefront of driving more equitable economic outcomes in communities. I come to this job from a wide variety of experiences. I've been here at IDC for a little over 16 months. Previous to this, I was running an organization called the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, or RCAP, where we worked exclusively with rural and tribal communities, indigenous communities across the United States, on a whole host of issues, economic development, entrepreneurship, but also things like access to safe drinking water and sanitary wastewater, disaster recovery efforts, really focused on building capacity at the local level to ensure that communities could confront whatever challenges and opportunities they might have and do it in a sustainable and resilient way. I've worked at both the state and federal level in economic development. I worked at the state of Michigan for 5 years, right in the heart of the recession, which was both the best and worst time to be in economic development. The worst, obviously, because we were hemorrhaging jobs and the uncertainty around the economy was really at a critical point, but also a great time to be doing it because you had to think differently. You had to be innovative about your approaches. And how do you serve communities from the size of Detroit all the way to really small communities in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? And then I served at the federal level at the U.S. Economic Development Administration, where I had a chance to lead the policy and external affairs for the agency. I got to work across 18 different federal agencies as a part of a couple different initiatives across the administration, and really have a chance to see how federal programs then work down to the state and local level and how they might have impact. So economic development has been at the core of my entire career. Obviously, I spent about 5 years specifically focused in really small communities and the complex issues and opportunities that exist there. And it's just a real honor to be able to continue the legacy of IDC and those that came in front of us, but also to help lead the future of what economic development is and can be in the future.
I'm going to start with one question because, it's in the title, International Economic Development Council. So I feel like it's, it's worldwide, of course. What would be your experience now in working with those? Let's just put it at the very top, because we know change happens in the policy arena. So what would be your experience in maybe starting to work, because I know you said you've been there about 16 months now, maybe starting to work with some of those leaders in economic development in other spots of the world?
Yeah, it's really been fascinating and fun to have the chance to interact with others across the world and what they're doing. And when I talk about partnerships, it's truly about that. How do we build partnerships with people and places in Europe or South America or Africa or Southeast Asia? And how do we utilize the skills, the talents, the resources that we have as an organization, allow them to be tailored to the needs of those different regions of the world? Because we know that economic development is very similar in many places, but also there's very distinct cultural and actually sectoral opportunities that exist in different parts of the world. So in Europe, for example, the number one, almost singular focus topic that we hear about is around climate change. But you don't hear that in other regions of the world in the way that you might in Europe. In South America, they're really focused on how do they build their own capacity, how do they build the strengths of organizations across the spectrum, whether it's chambers of commerces, whether it's federal or even state entities in those places, and how do they bring the nonprofit world to a much bigger role at the table, whereas not the nonprofit world right now in South America does not have the same prominence it does here in the United States, for example, or even in Europe. So there's really distinct challenges that you hear about in different parts of the world, but there's also some very distinct similarities between those places. And so for me, it's about building partnerships that allow us to learn from what others are doing and what opportunities might exist and where we can bring our resources to bear, to be tailored to the needs of those regions is really where I see our focus from an international standpoint.
That's interesting. I like the fact that you're hearing maybe from about climate change in a particular area. I'm sure that's across the board anywhere, but the fact that it's a priority in some places, or they're thinking about it in a different way than maybe somewhere else. It might be renewable energy here, and it might be something totally different somewhere else. For instance, in Dr. Bello's case, it might have more to do with, I don't know, water, agriculture water, or, maybe soil, or something, something of that nature. So Dr. Bello, speaking of you, why don't you chime in? Do you have any questions or any comments about what Nathan has shared so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hearing some of the buzzwords that we use in our own sector. Of course, the sectoral piece being the food and agricultural sector for us. And it's all about economic empowerment at the end of the day. Job creation. How do we make sure that we are building the capacity of the next generation after us? Things are different. COVID disruption, climate change, deforestation issues, and the opportunity we have in terms of the carbon credit market, all interwoven into what you just highlighted. For Shine Global in particular, we rely on strategic partnerships. I just finished a conversation before this meeting with one of the leading consulting management company, strategizing on actually putting an application, a request for proposal for USTDA. So from a policy point of view, the Prosper Africa initiative is trickling down And we, as a US-based company, have the rare opportunity to apply to be the contractor for a USTDA grant that has been awarded to a local Nigerian company. So you see how interwoven the policy, the sectoral focus, the capacity development, the leadership and building skill set for boys and girls, and we like to call it youths, and the gender balance, and everything is coming together. As you spoke, this is exactly what we are doing in practical terms, in building our own business, but at the same time, leveraging all the tools and the toolbox that you just identified, Nate. Thanks.
Nice. Tsegga, did you have something to share?
Nice.
Yes, thank you. I think this is really a good conversation for us to be part of, and maybe have create some kind of, I think at IBM we used to call it Think Friday. So this sounds to me like it's a Think Friday.
Perfect.
So we'll do Think Thursday kind of thing. I like it this way. So TNT.
Well, yes, it is. Nathan, from my standpoint, in my background, like I said, I was a Chamber of Commerce exec for a number of years, and served on local, state, all the way up, economic development sorts of councils and boards. But when you look at economic development as a whole, you've got your government, your local, your state, your regional, your federal or whatever. So there's only so many people that get paid to do that role. That's what I'm trying to say. And then there are organizations that kind of move into that, chambers of commerce and other economic development councils for regions, that sort of thing. But if there really aren't enough paid people, I think, around the world working on these sorts of things. So, I mean, who are you drawing to the table other than those people who are those government or, regional councils that are, basically in every community throughout the United States and abroad? Who else is coming to the table? Are they consultants? Give us
well, it's interesting because at IDC, our members kind of run the gamut, right? You've got government employees, you've got true EDOs, you've got nonprofits, you've got consultants, you've got businesses, you've got utilities, and you've got universities. So all of those kind of groups come together under our umbrellas as part of our membership model. But you're exactly right, that there are only a certain number of slots available. And part of that issue in my mind is we have not done a good enough job kind of defining what economic development is and helping the general public understand what it is and how people might get into this industry. Because it is, anytime I have a conversation, I ask people how they got into this work. And oftentimes it is not a straight line, right? There's no one at the age of 12 who's saying, I want to go be an economic developer. Because at age 12, and quite frankly, at age 22, you probably don't know what economic development is and how you can play a role. And so, a big piece of this is us as a field doing a better job of defining what economic development is and making those connections between and among the various things that play a role. I mean, oftentimes we haven't talked about housing, or we haven't talked about infrastructure, or we haven't talked about workforce development as a true part of the economic development field, but they all are. You can't have, economic opportunity without access to safe drinking water or broadband access. You can't have, the right opportunities if you don't have the housing affordability issues, that are being confronted by communities of all sizes right now. If we haven't talked about childcare access, if we haven't talked about, all of these issues, we haven't historically made those connections between all of those pieces to the puzzle, as you talked about earlier. And so we've got to do a better job of defining it and helping the general public understand what it is. But we also have to do a better job of getting young people into the profession so they can continue to help lead the future of what this work will be.
I think that's really well stated. Go ahead, Tsegga.
Thank you. So, what I like about this conversation also is that obviously I can see that the concept of entrepreneurial ecosystem is really describing the interconnection between entrepreneurs and their social and economic support. And you come in that lane for us, specifically for women, which seems to be one of the biggest economic drivers today, is coming from from women. Some obviously would go for the Latinx women or Black women, So in looking at these kinds of things in a decade of action, as the UN calls it, it seems like this is really perfect, and it's really aligning with what should be our roadmap for organizations like yours that are in support, and also for even the corporate space where there's a need of intentional leadership. So my question is that how much of what we say on our big banners of companies, we're saying the ESG is an important component to us really being part of this trajectory of better world and better future? And also, are there any ways that you're also connecting on that level with some of your funders or some of your partners, which you have a wide variety of critical landscape that is really powerful in becoming the major economic driver of this nation. However, they must be intentional and need the attention that is needed in this moment. So I think I gave you a big question, but I just wanted to see what are your thoughts around it.
I think the really critical word to use there is intentional.
Yes.
I think that has not been done with the intentionality that needs to be the case, quite frankly. I think if I'm being honest, I think we're at the very front end of this conversation, and we really need to think through in a very intentional and strategic way, how do we integrate in, whether we're talking ESG, whether we're talking about, one thing I hear all the time in the international community is sustainable development goals, right? But in the United States, we don't use that word. Most people don't even know what the SDGs are. So there needs to be, we need to bridge that gap, not just internationally, but as we think about the entrepreneurship and small business side of this, historically entrepreneurs have sat here and economic developers have sat here, and they'd never come together in a real intentional way, in a deep way. It's happened in pockets here and there in different cities and different regions of the world, but not in the way that we truly actually need to drive change and opportunity. And so part of what we're doing as an organization is thinking through, how do we bridge that gap? How do we bring entrepreneurs to those conversations that economic developers are happening, and how are we bringing economic developers to the conversations that entrepreneurs are having? Because those conversations, quite frankly, have never really happened in a deep way. They're connected, but almost in a tertiary, fashion where they don't understand their connection, even though it should be intuitive for them to understand it. It's not. And so part of that is a language piece. Part of it is an intentionality around convening conversations and bringing people together. And part of it is around engaging the private sector, engaging the public sector, the nonprofit and philanthropic sector, to be very intentional about how we do this, as opposed to kind of an ad hoc approach where we're doing this over here and another thing over there. We really need to bring people together, bring those conversations together, and be okay with understanding that some of those conversations can be hard and difficult, and not everyone's always going to agree on the right approach. But just simply having people in the conversation together can be really powerful.
I think this is very interesting conversation in that my career started with the food industry. I'm a food scientist. And so all I thought about is, how do we transform commodities into consumer packaged products? Until I had the opportunity to work with the United Nations Development Program in Nigeria as a consultant, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to work with the Minister of Agriculture on policy. And all of a sudden, I realized and recognized that there's a whole world that I was completely ignorant of. I never heard in my life, prior to going to Nigeria in 2012, anything called development partners. I heard of United Nations Development Program. I heard of United Nations. I heard of USAID. But who are they? What is that common lexicon for communication? And I think that's where this concept of intentionality comes in. So for the corporations, along the way, we started talking about gender balance. We started talking about inclusivity, not just from a market point of view, but from a workforce point of view. So there was intentionality, but it's in isolation. The people that work with government were a separate department from the people creating the new consumer food product. So this is such an important piece of where's the book that needs to be written that helps us to have a common lexicon. So when we look at the strategic development goals of the United Nations, we are able to link it to the US Prosper Africa policy. We are able to link it to the African Union Free Trade Agreement and Free Trade Area. How do we pull all of this together into a common language? So I think whereas there are intentionalities in the different sectors, the lexicon is so different until you are in it. And once you're in it, oh, okay, there's private sector. These are the corporations. We have the entrepreneurs, the solopreneurs, and now we also have institutions. We also have donors. And how does all of this work together so we can begin to create awareness for the next generation of leaders so they can understand that this can become a career path. You don't have to be just an entrepreneur. You can also be in the public policy advocacy space. I think there's a book to be written here.
There's a book and a course, and I think Nathan has some courses. Maybe you need to incorporate some more of this kind of language. I think this is great. You know, Tsegga and I have been working for the last several months on putting together a program that we were hoping to get through the United Negro College Fund. They actually, we've been working with the fund for several of my front runners to because they had some money and they wanted to put some money into some training programs. And of course, in North Carolina, several of the historically Black colleges under the UNCF, they exist here. There's like 10 or 11 of them in North Carolina and a few of them in the Raleigh-Durham area. And so Tsegga and I both are, you know, since she lives there and I used to, we were putting together some programming that would work for them. They are still going through some things, but it's really interesting. They have 37 private colleges under their belt, and not all of them, you know, are Black students. There's a good mix of, there's some Indian, there's some white, there's some, you know, a little bit of everybody. It's a kind of a melting pot, but people don't realize that. They think it's really all in one vein. But I doubt that any of the colleges really center on, there might be some economic development courses and whatnot, but to the extent that we're talking about it, it's probably old dry stuff. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's probably really old dry stuff that will not spark an innovative thought, you know, which is now that's where we're at. But in putting some of this stuff together, it occurred to me that there are occupations now for youth coming up that did not exist 5 or 6 years ago, whether because of the climate change, because of the pandemic, and there's several other factors that are in the mix of things, but you know, they sparked whole new occupation paths. And so we're kind of talking to them about that as well. But I think, Nathan, one of the things I wanted to bring to you actually has to do with innovation and where you see it dovetailing with economic development from a global perspective, you know, as you kind of move in the circles that you do, knowing what some of the, let's just say, challenges that you're seeing coming forth.
Well, I think, you know, there's two pieces to this that I would want to highlight. One is innovation with technology. You know, I was in a really fascinating presentation a few weeks back at Microsoft talking about where AI is going and where it's headed and how can you harness that in the right way? How do we, you know, secure and make sure that it's also done in a very intentional but also safe and secure way. But I always give the example, you know, when I was a kid, 2 things your parents told you were never talk to strangers and never get in a car with someone you don't know. And today we literally call car service to come pick us up for people that we don't know, right? The Ubers, the rest of the world. So like technology and innovation from a technology standpoint is going to continue to evolve, and it's going to evolve quickly. And how do we embrace that in the right ways from an economic development perspective? How do we use those tools in the right way? And how do we make sure that communities of all sizes and capacity have access to those tools? Because that's the other critical part in my mind is, there is this gap between the have and the have-nots. And if we continue to allow that gap to grow and expand, it's going to continue to polarize our environments, our communities, our regions. And it's really critical to make sure that we're building the capacity of those that don't currently have the capacity to utilize those tools. The other piece to the innovation side that I think is important, and this is more from my rural experience, is innovation isn't always technology-based. Innovation should be and can be harnessed in a variety of different ways. And, from a small community standpoint, innovation actually lives and thrives in small places because it has to, because they have less people, less resources, less capacity in many cases. And so it's not always technology-based when we talk about innovation. There's ways to spur and drive innovation that are not technology-based. And I want to make sure we recognize that and elevate that so that we don't just always think of innovation from a technology standpoint. But from an economic development lens, it's gonna be critical to make sure that we're continuing to innovate our approaches, innovate the tools and resources that we have, because we know the world is changing and we know economic development as a field is changing. And if we don't embrace those things now, we're not, number one, going to leave communities behind, but we're also not going to get those young people that are really excited about that innovation to be a part of these conversations.
Oh, well said. Well said. I think back to some of the things you were talking about when in your rural days and working with rural communities, and just, before we came on and Dr. Tony and I were talking about this, is there's a gentleman in Nigeria that I was communicating with that started out with a program based on educating young people until he realized they didn't have clean water in their villages. Yep. Then it became about clean water. And so you got to really look at the, where the problems are first and build from there to get that economic development piece moving along. You might think we just need to educate people, but, if they're not having clean water or good food or anything, that is the basis of life as we know it, then nothing else is going to grow from there. So that's so very true. Before we kind of end up, I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask a last question or make another comment. Clearly we need a book or another course. I don't know, but Dr. TonyBello, do you have any comments or final questions for Nathan?
I really like the adjective to qualify innovation that Nathan, you shared with us. From a rural perspective, from urban perspective, when I think about Nigeria and the economy of Nigeria today, it is driven by innovation in entertainment. You will be amazed how much money is coming into Nigeria through musical innovations. Yeah. And to have that word innovation as new ways of solving old problems and defining and qualifying technology innovation is one thing, but food innovation is another thing. Gender equity is another thing. So we are all innovators. We are change makers. We are doing all that we need to do. I think the question really more is about the comment is how the International Economic Development Council can bring in strategic partners who are truly innovators. And Mary, when we first met, it was about the innovators. And then the lexicon changed to front runners. These are really front runners, right? And continuing to do what you're doing, Mary, to bring people from different sectors, different micro areas of focus. But let's look at a macro level, macro definition, and look at the commonalities and the intentionality. Let's intentionally work together so we can enrich our vocabulary, enrich our lexicon, and just to foster a better level of cooperation and partnerships.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Nathan, any comment?
just to say, I would love to have any conversations that help us move those pieces forward. I mean, we're always looking to develop new relationships and new partnerships. So Doctor, if you have ideas or thoughts about who else we should be talking to or who else we can get engaged with, please send them my way. We're always looking to connect with people.
Well, I would say let's connect on the food and agriculture innovation. Yeah,
absolutely. I love that.
I think you've got a new partner right there.
Yeah,
right
there.
and I think I don't know if it was Mary or I don't know if it was Mary or Tsegga, but when one of you spoke, I put down driving occupational innovations and letting people know there are so many different fields that innovators can play in and give them the opportunity to focus earlier in their career than later. I found mine much later. It would have been nice to do it at 22 years of age.
I know. Tsegga, final comments or questions?
Well, in the book of Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, one of the quotes that I would like to reminds us, this one is that, what would you do if you were not afraid, was one of the questions that is always asked. And so what I like about this is that we are really, there is a collective wisdom in this conversation and in the one that we're touching at different level. So I appreciate Nathan, Dr. Bello, and Mary on doing this, but also more about the adaptive leadership that we seem to be having. And I think, Nathan, thank you for driving that in this ecosystem that you have created and you keep on expanding, whereby I'm seeing also, how there is this, I did, by the way, during COVID, I decided to do policy learning. So I was accepted to Harvard and in COVID times. And I did it because I was always on the front end asking for change. But change doesn't happen because I'm saying it or my friends or my partners are saying it. It happens because we have to sit at that table where we will have the opportunity to really talk with lawmakers and people that you could have some stakeholder management where we really be able to make that change. And so we were always, I felt that at that time, I was in the balcony, but I've never been on the dance floor. So what I see all is that we are on that dance floor and we're really making that change. That's both Dr. Bello on the food engineering that you mentioned, and also Nathan on the fact that you're bringing this kinds of amazing opportunity to have this adaptive leadership that brings us all together to learn from our experiences and really be on the dancing floor and making the real change that happens, both looking at the people that are going to impact and also affect change. So I thank you, and I do hope that we'll continue on not being afraid and do what we need to do.
Totally agree. Totally. I love that analogy. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
That was well stated too. So Nathan, last couple of questions. Where do you think the organization is headed? Is there anything that you're tackling that you feel like that's really big? I know you said that you do conferences and whatnot. I'm sure you've got something coming up. Share a little bit of the forecast, if you will, with us.
Yeah, there's a lot of change happening, quite frankly. So we just finished up a strategic planning process for the organization. It's a pretty transformative strategic planning process that is unlike anything the organization has gone through in quite a long time. And that's going to lead, obviously, to some pretty systemic changes for us. Evolution of the organization, both from how we think about our membership and the models associated with that. How do we create a big piece of this is going to be accessibility. How do we make sure that people have access to our tools and resources from different parts of the world, from different education levels, from different financial levels, to make sure that accessibility is at the key and the core of everything we do. And that aligns with the diversity, equity, and inclusion pieces that we already have in place, but want to continue to push forward. I think you'll see the way that we do conferences, the engagement that's a part of the conferences continue to evolve and change. We do have our next conference coming up in Dallas in September, which is our annual conference where we bring 1,500 people from across the world together. There's 12 different tracks of content happening at the same time. So tons of content and information, but also opportunities to engage with people from across the world that are doing this work and learn from one another. I think you're going to see us as an organization continue to evolve in the way that we serve our members and serve the communities that are represented by those members. We want to make sure that we can provide tools and resources that can be tailored to the needs of those communities. That, again, we provide access to communities in all parts of the world, no matter the size of the community. and that we, really use service as that main kind of focal point and intentionality for us as an organization. How are we helping to serve communities and the people associated in those communities? I think for us, we are international, but I think there's a huge opportunity for us to really grow and expand our international footprint and the partnerships that are associated with that. How do we help serve a larger set of communities and individuals in those communities? How do we provide tools and resources, again, that can be tailored to the needs of those communities, and partner with other organizations to help us understand, where we need to tailor those programs, those opportunities? And how do we truly make this an international community? How do we make sure that it's not just a conversation about what's happening in the US or Canada or even South America, but how do we really intentionally focus on conversations that are going to bring people together and allow them to learn from one another in really unique ways?
Well, you just landed in the right place at the right time. That's all I can tell you. I just wrote down about 5 opportunities when you were just talking. So, one of them, I'm sure you already have a relationship with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, but I do have somebody who's well connected with, he's serving under, and Dr. Tony knows, and he's serving under his 6th White House with the small business, and that's Dr. TonyBello. And so definitely, he also served on the board for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and he's an older gentleman that's very astute and just still cranking it out. International, he's got offices all over the world, but he's in international trade and commerce. So definitely somebody for you to meet. The other thing I was just thinking about is the courses that you have. How does somebody access those? On your website, I assume?
Yep. Okay. So you can go right to the website to access them. Most of our courses are virtual now, so you don't have to be in person for them. So it makes it easier for people to access. They're certainly, more cost effective if you're a member of IDC, but you can take them even as a non-member to IDC, and all the information on our website, which is just idconline.org.
I would have a recommendation for you. And the reason why I have that recommendation is because I have two very good resources for you that could get you global within that younger set of a community. Create a basic course, just like what we were talking about, the idea that a lot of people don't even know what economic development is. It's this dry subject that sounds like numbers and statistics and and land, and planning, which it is to a certain degree, but it's a whole lot more than that. And I think if there can be a very sort of basic, aim it at the college student, type of course, then there are 2 resources. One of them is through a gentleman that we have a relationship with that is co-located with the Cambridge Innovation Center. He is Indian. He's in India right now, but he has a large education platform that he has put out. This is something that is international, but he is he's one of the front runners that we've successfully brought forward to the United Negro College Fund. So he's already going to be incorporated in those. So here's the idea here. You get involved with him, you get in that platform, it goes already to those, so if you create that partnership, and that's what I'm thinking. There's 2 or 3 other opportunities that I see that it could expand you like that. Tsegga Pearl Leadership Institute. There you go. Who works with Duke University, and some other sponsors in that area for STEM education for young girls particularly. But there are lots of opportunities here. And through Dr. Tony, we work with the the Global African Leadership Council. That's how we know each other in a second capacity on Bridge Global First. But there's lots of opportunities for that accessibility that you were talking about sitting right here in front of you. And we're happy to try to be of some service and help you with that. But I want to say this, other than the partners that you're looking for, anybody else any other types of people that you think that you'd like to meet to move the work forward?
Well, certainly, Tsegga, you talked about the United Nations. I would love to get more connected in with what's happening there and where we can, help be of service there. I participated for the first time a few months ago. The IMF and the World Bank, had their convenings here in DC. So starting to build relationships there, but certainly, any relationships or connections that folks could make there would be incredibly helpful. And then the other piece to this, he talked briefly about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. foundations have historically only played a very small role in this world. And so starting to get them to understand what economic development is, and even not that we would change the priorities of what they're funding, but help them understand the connections between what they're already funding and economic development, to help them understand how they can help drive more equitable economic outcomes as a result of the whatever priorities they have, would be another big piece to this puzzle as we think about the broader subset of folks that maybe aren't as engaged in this work that maybe should be.
Nathan, I think what I would recommend, if I may, is that the world is full of challenges right now, and the majority of the challenges are not only climate change, but are also poverty, eradication of poverty, which should be at the baseline of anybody. And again, going back to some intentionality, which is needed. I think because our challenges are greater and there is a lot of fragility that's exposing us to different kinds of conditions, I would say even the local organizations that are here. For example, I'm a board member of the Go Global NC. Do you know them? So that's an organization that used to be called International Center for International Understanding, consistently working with the Confucius program. But now it seems like it's also associated, and it's working actually within the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. So there's a lot of connection that I could see here, even for you. We're also hosting an event somewhere around, I think, November. So I would like to, obviously, for you to come in and have a chance to talk to, I think it's going to be our biggest forum, we call it, where we have a lot of people that are invited, and understanding what this really means. Because if economic development is not addressing the current global challenges, which is obviously the three things that we know: poverty, equity, and climate change, that should be a great, in to anybody who has to be moved. Even our girls in the STEM program, we have STEM camps this summer and last summer during COVID, that I had asked them to look at the 16 goals and see where you could really do some kind of innovative attempt to really solve some of these challenges. And if business are not interested in really solving the current planet challenges, I think we're missing something, and that's where you come, by bringing this platform of innovators, thinkers, and continue to do that. But I would like to connect you back on our Go Global NC, and they are very quite connected also with the USGLC. Yeah, that's a great place for to bring some of your conversation alive with the global reach as well. So I know we have connected, and I know we have a thread of change and transformation. So I thank you all for that.
Well, absolutely. And I would love to get connected. All the ideas that the three of you have brought up, and certainly I'm sure there's many more as we continue to grow our partnership here. But thank you for the opportunity, and certainly please make any connections that might make sense.
All right. Oh, you can count on it. That's what we do. So I'm going to ask you. Yes, Dr. Tony, did you want to say
I just wanted to elaborate on your point in terms of how does the International Economic Development Council engage with the development partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. One suggestion is specific product offering for their grantees. Yeah. In applying for USDA grant, for example, the economic impact of what we are trying to do is a major piece. Imagine a startup food science and technology company now having to go with numbers, how many jobs we are going to create. I don't want to deal with that. Let it be is International Economic Development Council referral, where they are telling me, go to this resource group. They will be able to help you with the economic impact. It will make life much, much simpler and easier. So that may be one of your specific product offering in terms of service, not necessarily with the development partners, but the people they deal with need your kind of specific services.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah, and on our part, Mary, for Shinebridge Global, we really need to scale up our innovation in the food, this tapioca product. If we can have, I don't know how GoFundMe works, but if there are organizations that you are associated with that we can talk with, GoFundMe on specific research outcome. We want to transform, we want to make a pizza crust out of cassava flour. Let one of these organizations help us raise the funds to go and do that. We want to make crackers. We want to, do so many different things, but we need support. Yeah. So
this is a whole other conversation, but I'm just helping a company that is in the food industry. It's also in organic juices, go through the investment cycle. And people watching this is probably going to think, oh, she can help me get investment. Well, I do have somebody who does look for investments for people, but it has to be a specific situation. This company is really good. They're going for it. Why not work with them to get some of your cassava involved, because they're already in university systems. They already got some deals with university systems and hospital systems.
Awesome.
So so as far as taking over and doing some, I won't say snack bars, but actually little kiosk area things. So anyway, that could be a good way to get involved, but that's another conversation. Nathan, you have spurred economic development conversations here today. So, and my goodness, and the ideas are flowing. So I just want to say, stay here for just a minute. And let me say goodbye to everybody else. If you're watching this on YouTube, you now have this as a podcast just about anywhere you get your podcast: Apple, Spotify, Radio Public, you name it. You can find it anywhere. And I want to say thank you all here in front of me, Nathan, Tsegga, Dr. TonyBello. Thank you so much for joining us on Frontrunners Innovate this episode, and looking forward to seeing what comes out of this. I can't wait. Thanks, everybody. So now that you've heard the interview, exactly what did you hear? We tell our business development students that there are at least 3 opportunities in every introductory business call. You probably are hearing them, but you might not be processing them as the opportunities they could represent for you. So here are the ones that I heard in this interview. First one is that our interviewee, Nathan Ohle, mentioned that he worked in the past with the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. Now, this is a national network of nonprofit partners working to build capacity in rural and tribal communities across the country. I know of an innovator right now who is currently product testing within a tribal community in Oklahoma. I think maybe Nathan might be able to connect the innovator to other people that will be of help to them. So the second one is that Nathan talked about membership and content accessibility as being key for the International Economic Development Council. In particular, he indicated they need to reach out to youth. They're the next generation of economic developers, so we need to get to them, right? I shared that a basic educational program aimed at the college age level could be incorporated into education platforms who are partnering with colleges and universities and university foundations. Our co-host, Tsegga Medhin, mentioned that getting Nathan to speak at an upcoming forum in North Carolina could also expand access. And speaking to his interest in broadening to be more globally inclusive, there are plenty of NGOs out there and educational platforms that would appreciate having access to his educational content. So there are 2. Here's the third one. Dr. TonyBello, who is another co-host on this interview, mentioned that the council should think about offering a product or service that would help large grant foundations like the Gates Foundation to better assist applicants to show the economic impact that a grant could have in an assigned area. He even gave an example. So if you don't remember it, go back and listen to it. That could also serve as an income opportunity for the council itself. So on a general overall perspective here, Nathan opened the door for partnerships with the organization. So that could mean you could be a partner with the International Economic Development Council. So there you have it. If you're interested in learning more about business development or partnering with us, be sure to reach out. And until next time, know that the world needs more front runners like you. Bye-bye.